Hello, good evening, and welcome to another episode of In Conversation with. This is season three, episode one of In Conversation with. We at CASI undertake these events to reach out to senior management personnel and come out with executable advice. A little background on CASI. CASI is basically from New York and now present in 52 countries, primarily into the business of training on sustainability, CSR. We are also into collaborations, education, volunteering. In fact, we run the world's largest volunteering platform with over 3 million volunteers. So we promote road safety, digital literacy, women empowerment, and things like that. And we have great corporate connects. So we work with, in India alone, we work with more than 400 companies. So that's it about CASI for now. Now, before I go on and hand over the mic to Mahesh sir, Mahesh in Yes Bank, he's also a strong promoter of impact investment, and we have lot to learn from him. But before I go on to that, I would like to throw an open question to the panelists. See what started as an obligation, impact investment. Now, I'm told or I understand that Sir Benjamin Franklin, the founding father of America, set up a fund to help small businesses procure licenses and start business in India, in America as well as overseas. So that was more of an obligation on part of an American government. Is now becoming mainstream, more and more mainstream, more and more investors, companies, funds, everybody is looking at impact investments. So a quick question to the panelists: how long do you think before this becomes proper mainstream, or is it already mainstream? Anyone can answer this.
Can I take that?
Sure, please.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Nilotpal, and I work for Venture Advisors Private Limited. We are into investment management, specifically for food and agribusiness sector. So to respond to your question, Paresh, I think we are moving in that direction where the impact investment would become mainstream. If you look at the history of impact investment, I think it started in mid of 2000. And, over the last 10, 15 years, it has become increasingly mainstream. And not just in terms of, the kind of impact it has been able to create, like financial inclusion, food and agribusiness, healthcare, education, but also in terms of the profile, the kind of, the companies that we have seen emerging, the way some of the financial inclusion companies, which earlier used to be microfinance institutions, they have turned into banks, small finance banks, and the way they have become professional, and also the way they have started yielding in terms of, investors. All these things are clearly indicating a move towards, these investments turning more and more mainstream, be it education, where the investment is initially started in schools and, daycare centers. It has increasingly moved towards education technology. Similarly, the
So you're
healthcare,
saying that this is already mainstream?
it is becoming, it's not there as yet.
Okay.
But
okay. I have a few further questions on that. But let's move on to let's have Mahesh sir. Let's listen to Mahesh sir. What's his angle? I'm very keen to know what's his angle. Mahesh sir, over to you, please.
Many thanks, Paresh, and once again, thank you to CASI for this opportunity, and I have to say that it's my pleasure to be here with. Given that it's COVID, I can't think of a better way to spend my Friday evening than with all of you. So once again, it's a delight. To go back to your question, Paresh, just very, very briefly, I don't disagree with Nilotpal. I think he's right. But whether you want to go back to Benjamin Franklin or days post Benjamin Franklin, I think we all need to remember that banking was initially founded on a basic principle, and that principle was to really help local communities and to help people grow, evolve, develop, start businesses, succeed in life, improve their quality of life, etc. So that was the purpose of banking, since we're talking about banking. And I think over the years, that evolved into something very, very different. I think the sense of purpose that banking started off with way back when got lost along the way. But now, I think to Nilotpal's point, I think we're heading back. I wouldn't say the pendulum is swinging back, because life goes in spirals, not pendulums, not from A to B and B to A, but it's more like A to B to C to D, because the scenario keeps shifting, the ground keeps shifting, the context keeps changing. But nevertheless, I would say that that the focus has once again gone back to doing good. I don't know if it's all about helping the local community, but I think it's the focus has gone back to doing good and is gravitating towards the fundamental principles on which banking once began a long, long time ago. So just my quick thoughts on that. Now, having said that, let me also point out that today is the day after Earth Day. So yesterday was Earth Day, a big, big day for Mother Nature, planet Earth enthusiasts, and I think it was a big celebration, rightfully so. And if you all followed President Biden and his list of guests that were invited to participate in the leadership summit, you will have noted that they came back pretty strong with some major commitments to improving and mitigating climate change and mitigating some of the existential risks that many people are talking about. So just to give you an idea, the US actually pledged to reduce greenhouse gases by 50% by 2030. So that's in less than 10 years. That's significant. Canada did the same by saying they would reduce their greenhouse gases by somewhere from 40 to 45% by 2030. Japan, 46% by 2030. India has pledged to invest in a big way in renewables. And we've already given some greenhouse gas commitments and carbon neutrality dates and timelines and commitments as well. China said they'd be carbon neutral by 2060. So Russia, another big player, stood up and basically said, look, we're one of the biggest carbon sinks. And so they're shooting for net neutrality, carbon net neutrality. So what that basically means is that they will make sure that if they emit X, they will sink in X so that they're carbon neutral and they don't contribute in an incremental way with greenhouse gases. Now, just to put this in context, all these promises have been made before. There's no doubt about it. Whether it's the Paris Accord or any of the previous accords, the Tokyo Protocol, and so on and so forth. So at this stage, I think we are all hoping, fingers crossed, that this time they see the imminent and existential issues and dangers of allowing the average temperatures on this planet to go up by 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, because that could be a very, very serious problem for many, many parts of the world, and especially countries like India that sit on the equator. We'll get into that at some point in a moment. But let me just, I'm going to take a few minutes. I don't have a prepared speech, so I'm just going to share some. I jotted down some thoughts, so I'm going to go through those thoughts and some ideas, and then kind of open it up to all of you to jump in. But at the risk of repeating something that is redundant, I'm going to say that COVID is a phenomenon that has created some massive paradigm shifts. And what do I mean by that? It's not just about things like working from home and flying less. It's been more fundamental. It has changed people's thought processes. It has challenged our value systems. It has prompted us to ask ourselves questions about life. What's the meaning of life, and what's important and what's not important? It has brought home the significance of family and loved ones. And speaking of working from home, as a result of working from home, supply chains have been disrupted, where you had big offices and office complexes, and whether it's in Bangalore or BKC or Nagarpata in Pune, for example, those buildings are now going to be empty, and it looks like maybe not completely empty, but they could be empty to the tune of 80% going forward. And what that has done is that has affected the entire ecosystem and the supply chain that feeds into those facilities, whether it's food services, car services, mobile service towers, spectrum towers that people had invested in. Many of those may have to relocate to suburbs where people are now going to spend more time because they're working from home, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So some massive paradigm shifts that I think offer opportunities within the context of impact investing and responsible investing and ESG. So I think that's good news. We've got the millennials who are looming larger and larger and larger as we speak. They're very important. They're the next generation. They've got their own preferences. They lean towards brands that exhibit responsible behavior. They will have a lot of money going forward, and they're going to invest only in spots where they see ESG and spots where they see responsible business decision making, responsible in a very holistic sense. So these are all massive, I think, paradigm shifts that have been brought home in a sense by this pandemic, and I don't think it's going to change. I think these shifts are here to stay. And supply chains, again, will have to be reconfigured. Now, the other very interesting thing that COVID has highlighted for all of us is that, if in certain aspects there was a lot of lethargy and inertia in terms of wanting to mobilize resources, be it money or talent or capability, or in terms of being able to pull people together, galvanize groups, galvanize countries, governments together, to act and to act quickly. I think COVID has demonstrated that there is a will for doing that, and it can be done when something is existential like this. This is almost like a nuclear war in some sense. So from that standpoint, I think we will see more cooperation, and hopefully we will with vaccine production, vaccine sharing, and we'll move a little away from sovereignty. And COVID has no sovereignty. No country has sovereignty from COVID, and no country has sovereignty from climate change. What happens in Chad affects Russia, and what happens in Russia affects China, and what happens in China affects India, and so on. So we all share the pain. What happened in the Amazon forest affected the rest of the world, right? So there's no sovereignty to climate change. So climate change is a massive issue. Now, just a couple of thoughts on India. We're a developing nation. We have a very low per capita income. We sit at the equator, and because we sit at the equator, temperatures tend to be very hot on average. 38, 39, maybe 40 degrees centigrade Celsius. And so, and we have a huge coastline, maybe 7,000 kilometers, maybe 8,000 kilometers, something like that. So when there's even a slight variation in temperatures because of greenhouse gases and because of climate change, that has a huge impact on us. So for us, to go from 45 degrees to 46 or 47 becomes an existential challenge. It's a massive issue. And we also are exposed to sea level changes, ocean level changes, unlike maybe some other countries that are landlocked. And one could argue that there are some countries out there that aren't all that excited about minimizing CO2 emissions because that may not be in their favor. Russia might be an example where they'd love to see their Arctic regions warm up and where they can once again open up those Arctic regions and use them for commercial purposes or what have you. That's an extreme example, but those are some of the dynamics that I think we're going to be looking at. But again, opportunities for SRI, ESG, impact investment, right? So these are some of the interesting things. Now, coming back to India, our per capita footprint is probably around 2 tons per person. In some of the developed nations, it's like 20 tons per person, 10 times. And so there's this whole tug of war going on between some of the developing nations, some of the already developed like China and the US and some of the European nations on this whole question of, should you be more responsible? Am I being irresponsible? And so on and so forth. Clearly, based on India's growth rate, I think we will exceed the ideal, which is around 2.3, 2.4 tons. And so we'll have to see how the world reacts and what happens there. But we're going to have to share our burden, fortunately or unfortunately, for other people's sins in some sense. Now, let me now touch a few minutes on sustainable investing, my thoughts on that, and then I'm sure all of you have many, many valuable perspectives and viewpoints on that as well. You know, sustainable investing is really value-based investing in many ways, and it is a lens through which you look at existing investment classes. So it's not an investment class. So you've got private equity, you've got publicly listed equities, then you've got bonds, fixed income. You call them green bonds if you like, social bonds, whatever. Then you kind of progress on that spectrum, and you go further to the other side, where you end up all the way with grants, which are almost like free money or very low interest rate money. So at the private equity end of the spectrum, you've got a scenario where people want market rates, and then as you progress, you end up with more and more concessional rates, if you will. Now, the lens through which you look at any of these classes is driven by your purpose, your mission, the cause that you would like to see driven, and so within this whole concept of sustainable investing, responsible investing, we've got impact investing, which one could argue is somewhat more personal in some sense, where you want to be a lot closer to that investment because you'd like to see your purpose and your mission see some kind of fruition in a more direct manner via your investment. So you want to be more involved in the decisions, you want to be more involved in the outcomes, and so on. Whereas with at the other end, you got ESG, where you're most likely investing in listed equities or even bonds, where you don't have that direct touch and feel for the money that you've invested, but by and large, you're picking certain sectors either through exclusion or inclusion. Socially responsible investing, some people call it that, is also all about exclusion. You don't want to invest in tobacco or in mining companies or in alcohol companies, for example. So you completely eliminate those from your decision framework and go only after those sectors that appeal to you because of your own mission, your own personal intent. So you've got all of these things, and then there are lots of debates. So if you have a tobacco company, a cigarette manufacturing company, but that is nevertheless taking good care of its employees and handling its waste very effectively, just what is that? Is that a socially responsible company? Is that a socially responsible business? Interesting debate, interesting question. From an ESG perspective, I think people would argue that some of those things are the lowest common denominator. So even if you're in a, quote, sinful business, the fact that you're taking good care of your people and the fact that you've got transparency and you've got good governance says that you're making an attempt to establish some kind of a lowest common denominator and baseline around good governance and good business practices. But there are those who will say, wow, I'll never go into that sector because it's just not my cup of tea. Right? So you've got these shades of across an entire spectrum of businesses and investments that one could look at depending on the lens through which you view these things. I would say that generally markets have rewarded ESG investments by and large. So if you look at the Nifty ESG, or you look at the MSCI ESG funds, by and large, they have done better. There has been alpha in those investments over and above market returns. By the same token, because the stakes are so high and because people put so much weight or weightage on those types of investments and decisions, that if they stumble or they trip or they falter even slightly, they typically drop quite significantly, and it takes them some time to come back. And that's just a phenomenon of the very high expectations that are placed on such companies when somebody says, hey, I'm investing in this company XYZ because I really believe that they're a good company, but then they all of a sudden get exposed on some aspect of ESG, whether it's in the E or the S or the G or all three, and they fall. And now, I'm in a state of complete disappointment and disillusionment, and I'm going to dump them, and so the stock collapses, and then it takes some time for that to come back. So these are some of the aspects. I think that generally, I think the mood, going back to the point that we discussed at the outset, that Nilotpal highlighted very nicely. I think the overall mood, I think there's a recognition that global capital markets wield enormous power. That's always been there. But I think there's also a growing recognition of the fact that that enormous power can now be redirected and should be redirected towards good causes and towards the betterment of society and the planet and the environment and that type of thing. And I think that's a very, very positive thing. And what remains to be seen is, the stick and carrot trade-off, right? There are regulations which insist that companies do whatever they need to do. And then there are certain companies that voluntarily raise their hands and say, we will do, regardless of regulations. And I think the holy grail eventually will be that the point we reach where companies and individuals, a responsibility at the individual level as well, stand up and say, these are the right things that we need to do. And so this is what we should do. So I'm going to leave it at that. I probably already overstepped my time limit. So thanks again for indulging me, and back to you, Paresh ji.
Thank you very much, Mahesh. So those were some deep thoughts. One sentence which I am going to use in my future presentations is that there are so many shades in investments. This one I like. I particularly like shades in investments. So a quick query. See, when we started moving towards impact investments, and somebody, when you graduate, you go into the liquor business, you work for an ITC, you work for liquor, somebody works for a microfinance company, and somebody works for an Infosys. So when we all graduated, it was really the best company, the best brand, the best salary. We were not really thinking impact or ESG and things like that. And I understand that even when you are founding a company, it is based on your experience and expertise that you bring to the table, right? So all this, is it just a matter of being at the right place at the right time? So if you are a founder of a microfinance company, you are a right place, right time kind of thing. Is it that?
Paresh, I would argue that I don't necessarily think it's right time and right place. If you can look at multiple sectors. You can look at agri-tech, you can look at fintech, you can look at health tech, edutech. I mean, you name it. I mean, the common theme there is tech, and I have some views on that as well. I think technology disruption has its pluses and its minuses, and we can talk about that if anybody's interested. But I think by and large, any sector, any industry that one jumps into these days has that burden of consciousness that exists today that I don't believe existed in the past. I think, and to a certain extent, we've kind of brought this upon ourselves. If you look back over the last 1,000 years, we didn't destroy the climate as much as we've done in the last probably 100 years.
Correct.
Right, and so I think certain things run in parallel with that, and as a result, this has become an urgent issue. And so from that standpoint, the consumer, you can talk about B2B, B2C, or you could have many B's in between, but ultimately it's the C. So whether you go work at a building where there are multiple B's until you're the C who's sitting in that office and working in that office, or you are buying from Apple, which is a B, and you're the consumer and it's a direct B to C. The point is, there's always ultimately the C that is going to determine a business's success and determine whether a business is being responsible, whether a business is mindful of the environment, and all the rest of it, the SDGs, etc. So I don't think it's a question of right time, right place. I think any sector that you're in has huge opportunities for really applying that conscience very, very deliberately and finding ways to get that alpha, if you will. Is it easy? No, But can it be done? Yes, you've got private equity funds, you've got LPs, limited partners, you have institutional investors with very deep pockets. You've got pension funds in the US, in Canada, for example. You've got sovereign governments in the Gulf who are they're not all benevolent. You know, they are very sharp business people, and they want returns, and they're funneling money into these investments because they see higher returns, perhaps over a slightly longer time frame.
Okay. No, we shall come back to EdTech when we have Amit Dutta as a speaker, because he's going to touch upon that, and I would like to see your opinion on Amit's talk. In the meantime, before we go on to the next speaker, we can go to Nilotpal. But before that, I have a question. You know, I have a small question for Amit ji and Kannan. Do we have Kannan in the audience?
Yes, Paresh ji, I'm there.
Yeah, Mr. Kannan and Amit, I have a question. And give me a short answer, you know, a yes, no, or your opinion. I'll just introduce Mr. Kannan works for IIM Udaipur. He works with Janat Bhai. Janat Bhai is a very good friend. He is the director of IIM Udaipur, and we are always trying to do something together. So the question is, when impact investors started and fund managers, and I manage some funds myself, is it only a matter of reclassification, you know, and saying, okay, I am investing in impact, I am I'm the torch bearer of impact. So is it more of a matter of reclassification, or there is a lot of sincere effort really going on? What is your opinion, Mr. Kannan and Amit?
So I think my opinion is, I think at least off late, there's a sincere focus to ensure that they want to see the impact, right? So I think the focus is moving towards that the investment happens where there's a significant impact, Paresh ji.
Okay, Amit ji, your opinion?
Yeah, so Paresh ji and Kannan, I would echo, you know, that it is the latter. Because clearly there is a very conscious, attempt to look at positive social impact as a very explicit outcome of the investment, along with financial returns. So as Mahesh said, there are different shades, but clearly on that spectrum, social impact is a very conscious and a specific outcome that is desired right at the very outset. That's the investment thesis. So I believe that's true.
Thank you very much. Let's have Amit ji's opinion. Amit sir, please tell us your angle. What's your angle on sustainability?
Right. So thanks, Paresh ji, and a very good evening to all my fellow panelists. I think it's a very topical theme. Impact investment, especially at a time when we are dealing with the double whammy of a public health crisis internationally and more so in India, and obviously the devastating effect that various kinds of lockdowns, the socioeconomic disruption that's happening in the wake of that. I would first like to state, why I care about impact, and it's important to kind of spell that out because I believe that you'll be able to kind of relate to my ideas and appreciate where I'm coming from a little better. I have been in the development consulting or social impact consulting space for the last almost 2 decades. I've been working mostly with Big Fours. And I've actually been very, kind of fortunate to work across the spectrum, whether it's, multilateral, funders like the World Bank, the ADBs, the DFIDs of the world, to, central governments, state departments. And I've worked across, like a bunch of sectors, right from investment, climate reform, doing business, ease of doing business, to skill development, sanitation, and more recently, I'm kind of focusing on social protection. And also, very interestingly, I have worked in all aspects of policy design, program implementation, where we've actually helped governments manage large national priority programs, help them implement it. And I've also looked at the other end of the spectrum, where we are looking at impact monitoring and evaluation. So I come with that perspective, into this discussion, and I would really like the theme of my thoughts here to be around how I believe working, for the past 2 decades, largely in the space of government consulting, how I believe that public policy can be a very big enabler for impact investment. There are a lot of lessons there for impact investment to take from public funded programs. I mean, if you look at the very core of government funding, I mean, the very explicit objective is public good, right? Though it doesn't quite get classified in the purest sense of impact investment, because that is typically private capital which is seeking social good. But just look at the total outlay of the government of India's 2021-22 budget. It's about almost 35 trillion rupees, or if you take a ballpark number, it's about maybe $500 billion at an annual level. So that's the amount of funding that is available for various kinds of development programs, whether it's infrastructure. And if you were to maybe make a more kind of granular breakup of how much is spent on social welfare, that number is anywhere about a quarter of that, if one uses any ballpark estimates. So I really believe that for any kind of impact at scale, it's extremely important to also look at what is the overall ecosystem for impact. And for me, having worked in this sector, I think I've clearly realized that impact at scale is possible only by adopting an ecosystem approach. So if you put the citizen right at the very heart and the very core of this ecosystem, in terms of understanding what are the specific needs or gaps that you are addressing. And I'd love to illustrate this through, the example of the Swachh Bharat project, the Swachh Bharat urban program, which I had, the privilege of kind of leading a team and working with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs for almost 2 years. Very ambitious program. The central funding available for this program was over the period 2015 to 19 was almost to the tune of almost $2 billion. And if you look at the total program spend, where you take the share of the states, it was almost $5 billion plus. Perhaps one of the largest, initiatives of the government of India. And if you could show me by a show of hands, before I delve any further into it, how many of you really believe that Swachh Bharat, was a successful campaign, and you really believe that, Indian cities are cleaner, post Swachh Bharat? It would be good to see a show of hands, at least.
Well, yes, absolutely. It was
right.
a success.
Right. Thank you. Because I think it would be absolutely futile to launch into that example if the view is otherwise. So if you look at this, the program, and I, as I said, keeping the citizen right at the heart in terms of what was the need gap, it was very clearly realized that there's a shortage of individual household toilets and public toilets, and the shortage is estimated to be about 6.6 million individual household toilets and about close to about 5.5 lakh public and community toilets. Right. That was the gap that was being addressed. Now, if you look at the programs and policies that were directed to that objective, you had a host of them. You had a solid waste management policy, you had a liquid waste management policy, a fecal waste management policy, looking at everything from segregation of waste to aggregation, disposal. And there were many other incentives and supporting SOPs, etc., that were launched, right? And so one piece is, of course, the programs and policies with very, very clear KPIs on outcomes, the outputs, the outcomes, and the impact. And I think it's extremely important for any kind of an impact directed program to make a distinction between the three. And again, giving the example of Swachh Bharat, very clearly the output for us was building toilets, right? But we realized that, that cannot be the desired outcome. Just getting toilets will not really get us to open defecation free cities. That was the outcome we were looking at. We want cities to be open defecation free, where people actually adopt sustainable changes in their behavior and they use toilets, right? So that was the outcome. And what was the impact that we were looking at? We were looking at basically reducing, and that was the end game, was how do you improve public health and how do you reduce under 5 mortality? Because very few people might realize that most of the fecal contamination that happens in India's freshwater sources are probably responsible for 80% of the waterborne diseases and deaths in the country. So the end game was actually, that was the large impact that we were looking at, how over a period of time, we would be able to achieve that. The other aspect, so policies, programs, very core KPIs around these 3 aspects. Then looking at the actors, and the actors are everyone, everyone involves everyone from the funders of impact, the payers of impact, to the implementers, which would be the states, which would be the urban local bodies in the case of Swachh Bharat Urban, would be the service providers, all your waste management agencies, for instance, and of course other players like technical consultants such as us who work with these actors and facilitate that change, right? And so that's as far as the actors are concerned. And now looking at, of course, I did speak about the budgets and the resources that need to be available in terms of manpower to kind of support that program. But the most fundamental aspect that I realized, which is really the force multiplier for any program to achieve scale, you need to add, 3 or 4 very important elements to it. The first element, I believe, is the element of networks and partnerships. For instance, Swachh Bharat, very few people might know, we had some very, very innovative partnerships, with civil society organizations. We had it with tech majors. We had a program with Google, where we came up with an innovation around Google Toilet Locator, where every public toilet in the country is actually mapped in Google Maps, and you can check it out after this call. If you kind of want some further credence on that. With Janagraha, which is a very well-known civil society platform, we launched the Swachhta app, where every citizen could take charge in his or her hands and could report a grievance. If they see anything, if they're not happy with, they see a mound of solid waste on the street, they can report it. And, there was a tech-enabled platform where the ward engineer would immediately get an alert and be able to take action. These are just 2 of the partnerships. There were several other partnerships, with donors, there was a whole of government approach. In Swachh Bharat, we actually partnered with very unlikely ministries, with Ministry of Agriculture. What do you do with all the wet waste, which is turning into compost? We needed a policy and a working coordination mechanism with, the Ministry of Agriculture in terms of how would that compost coming from the wet waste be actually utilized by farmers. We were working with Ministry of Urban Affairs on NULM, to make sure that how do the manual scavengers get livelihoods. So a whole of government approach, in terms of networks and partnerships. The second point is largely around communities of practice and, behavior change. And I think the success of Swachh Bharat in particular was that it became a people's movement, right from a child in your house to a veteran to your housewife. There was a lot of IEC and behavior change communication, which happened at a massive scale to really kind of embed that, right from the leader speaking and every ULB taking it. So, that was the other aspect. Another element which was very significant, and Mahesh just touched upon it, and I absolutely agree with him that technology can be a very, very strong enabler as long as it's directed to really the cause, and we don't become slaves to the technology, but the technology serves us. So digital platforms, whether it was digital monitoring of ULBs or for that matter, kind of having various apps, etc. That played a very, very big role in the massive scale up. And the fourth aspect was clearly measuring impact. If you don't measure impact, you can't scale up impact. One of the most the biggest experiments that we did with Swachh Bharat and which kind of paid off was we created this competitive framework of reforms called Swachh Sarvekshan, where 4,000 ULBs competed with each other based on a kind of a commonly agreed framework of what a clean city means, what good sanitation practices are, and it was actually verified and validated by a third party on 3 aspects: documentation, giving evidence that you had a practice and you are maintaining records, knowing that there is a lot of ingenuity and records can be managed. The second aspect was looking on the ground for actual evidence of the infrastructure being there. So if you're saying that waste is being processed, you need to have a waste kind of a management plant there. If you're saying that energy is being produced from waste, you need to have a waste for energy plant which is functioning there. So we looked at that. And the third aspect was getting citizen feedback. Do you really feel that changes are happening on the ground? Do you really see positive change happening around you? And this feedback loop, creating it, giving it to the regulators, giving it to the implementers, continuously for improvement. If any one ULB was doing a good practice, sharing that with the common. So we all know Indore was the cleanest city, but how many of you know that more than 200 cities actually visited Indore the year it was declared the cleanest city in the country, and it set off a complete wave and revolution of good waste management practices just because Indore became a lighthouse and a role model. That's the short point I want to make from a public policy angle, that public policy is an extremely powerful enabler of impact, and considering the budgets that are at the disposal of the government, clearly profit is not the motive, but there is a very, very strong need for private capital and capability to complement and supplement public funding to create that impact. And the kind of changes that we all collectively want to see to be achieved in society, frankly, that can rarely be achieved with just a bunch of private initiatives. No, with absolutely no disregard for what has been achieved in impact funding. Over the last 10 years, impact funding in India is believed to have, there's almost been a total of almost $10.6 billion of investment. Last year, I understand from the Impact Investors Council, about $2.6 billion in investment were there. There were close to about 13 exits. And if you look at the funding that a developing country, the developing world requires, in 2018, there was a very interesting, kind of estimate around that. The $2.5 trillion are required per annum for the next 12 years till 2030 if we have to achieve our SDG goals as we have captured them. So there is absolutely no way that just public spending or private capital alone can achieve this. I think it has to be the double helix of these two kind of coming together, supplementing each other to create that impact. And so that much for my point of view on this. And I just want to kind of leave this panel with a thought, or perhaps also a question, is to say that today, if you look at the pattern of impact investment in India, anyone would agree who's in that space that bulk of that today is going to access to finance, and about a quarter of that perhaps to access to finance, and another quarter to edtech, right? And clearly, while financial gains are as important as the social gains, we need to look at the larger picture in terms of what is most relevant now, in the here and now. So if one were to look at the pattern of investment that happened in 2020, I was a little surprised to see that health and livelihoods, which are in fact the most important areas for intervention and impact, have probably received a very, very minuscule percentage of that investment. Right? Because last year, the trend was that about almost 3/4 of the total deals were in late stage investments, mature investments, where there was a greater predictability on the returns. So it could be true. And I'm happy to be kind of, challenged on that impact investors did approach, take a more conservative approach, because a lot of impact investments' core idea was to fix market distortions, or to basically focus on those areas where public funding is not delivering the desired results. So I just leave the panel with that larger thought that how can we mobilize social cap, the overall impact capital towards the areas which are currently the most important, but will of course have long-term payoffs if not immediate returns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amitji, for your thoughts. I have a comment and a query. I'll first congratulate you on a very well presented opinion on public policy, partnerships, community, and behavior change. When it comes to behavior change, we are the world's largest behavior change event company. I'll tell you what our first event. In 2018, we organized an event at 503 locations across Maharashtra on the same day at the same time. And this was to promote road safety. More than 5 lakh students came out on the road and joined our rally at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we kind of support the cause, support the statements that you are talking about. in terms of behavior change. And we are working on multiple events now. So our last event, we had 7.5 lakh students participating on the same day at the same time across 1100 odd locations across Maharashtra. So I completely agree to that. I also agree to your point on private capital versus public funds. Even if you look at CSR funds, it's 25,000 crores, and last year we have managed to spend around 7,500 crores. 7,500 crores is not even 10% of the annual budget of one department of one state. Yeah, so yeah, you are right. Private funds are not the torch bearers. But what happens is in our discussions over the last few years with all the foundations that we work across 52 countries, we understand that foundations are trying to create a model. So, we work on a small village, we create a model, and then we reach out to the government saying this works, this is the lowest cost, and this is how a private company would do it, ensuring profitability. So now help us with the larger funds, and then we can create a larger impact. So many of my friends across foundations, JSW, SBI, Mamta Saikat, Bharti, they're working on this model, and it is producing results. So we are sort of working on what you're saying. So thank you once again for your thoughts. Next, I would like to invite Avinash ji. But Avinash ji, I would like to have a question. Avinash ji, are you there?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Kannan Saab, are you there?
Yes, Paresh ji.
I'm sorry, Kannan Saab, I'm leaning on you for, I understand you are an audience, but we would really like to lean on you because of the vast knowledge that you have. So I have a question for Avinash ji and Kannan ji. The very generic question. A few of us believe that investments in innovation should be classified as impact investments. Kananji, you represent an IIM, a strong force. Innovation is something that every IIM, IIT is working on. So let's have your thoughts on it, and then Avinash ji, I would like to have your thoughts on it before we proceed to Avinash ji's opinion, 3, 4, 5 minutes on his angle. So my question again was: is innovation or should innovation be classified as impact investment?
Very interesting question, Paresh ji. So I think we need some deep thinking to answer that. But I think, innovation is intended to create impact, right? But how do you define impact varies, right? An innovation can create an impact more from a commercial standpoint, right? So it's creating an impact for people who are starting their businesses, right? But innovation is very key for us to be successful in the impact investment in the context that we are talking about, right? Without innovation, the impact investment will not succeed. That is very clear, right? So to kind of classify innovation purely as impact investment, I am not sure whether we are there still, but every innovation is expected to create an impact, Paresh ji. That's my humble opinion.
Thank you, sir. Avinash ji.
You're on mute, Avinash ji.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, Avinash ji, boliye.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, thanks a lot to CASI for inviting me for this powerful packed session. So I am basically representing one of the semi-government model, that is AIC Pinnacle, Atal Incubation Center Pinnacle Group of Industries. So this organization is basically supported under 3 ministries. One is Atal Innovation Mission Niti Ayog, second one is Ministry of MSME, and third one is Ministry of Electronics and IT, Government of India. So we are basically supporting the startups. So the question which is very relevant to our portfolio, that is whether innovation is impactful or not. So I would like to highlight some of the discussion points on this. So going back to one of the very root things which we all have gone through in our schools. Uh, so the point was Gandhiji's talisman. So what was the exact statement? So the statement was that I will give you a talisman whenever you are in a doubt or when the self becomes too much with you, apply the following test. So recall the face of the poorest and the weakest man or woman whom you may have seen. So ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to them. So that's the point of innovation. So service to the humanity. So whatever be the concept, whatever be the product, whatever be the services which we all are going to develop, whether that is going to be service to the humanity. So the question is that how this particular thing is going to create an impact. So Mitesh ji, just I would like to play one short video to answer this. Just a minute.
Sure, I have given you the right to share the screen.
Audible?
मेरे पिताजी किसान हैं। मेरे पिताजी रात में कहीं खेत पर जाते थे तो उन्हें बहुत सी परेशानियां आती थी और मेरे पिताजी मोबाइल डिस्चार्ज हो जाता था और बारिश से बचने के लिए एक हाथ में टॉर्च ले लिया और एक हाथ में छाता ले लिया। तो मैंने सोचा क्यों ना एक संयंत्र बनाया जाए जो एक ही हाथ में आ जाए, इसलिए मैंने एक स्मार्ट सोलर छाता बनाया।
So I think this video and the effort of that is small school village kid might have answered to your question, Paresh. I think all the panelists are agree with this particular point of view that innovation can create an impact. And once we are talking about all these things, so multiple things are coming into our perspective that whether how impactful is going to be that investment, how this is going to be different, whether it is going to be of social impact investing, benefits, recommendations, or how the government policies and how the industry corporate policies are taking care of all these things. So we will again come back for the discussion. So over to you, Paresh ji. Yeah.
No, please, let's proceed with your opinion. We would like to have your opinion for the next 3, 4, 5 minutes on impact investments and things that you do,
Right.
to promote impact investments.
So basically, impact investing, it differs from socially responsible investment, which is well-defined framework for choosing the investment. So whether it is based on the environment, social, governance criteria, or in fact, the impact investing has evolved out of socially responsible investments, so that the broader investment, the community can reach out, the products and services can be reached out to the communities. The differences today, which is having for the investors or for the other community networks. So it is going to be more proactive for their intentions for positive impact. So in our organization, we are supporting the startups for the development of all this kind of ecosystem. So lots of startups are there from the EV domain. So once we are analyzing the startups and we are taking and we are evaluating their ideas, so we are directly taking care of the things that how they are going to be socially relevant, whether they are going to provide the services to the humanity, how they are going to be sustainable. So we are taking care of all these things during the evaluation process. So during the seed funding kind of activities, during the investor pitch duration activities, we are taking care of all these things, that how the investment is going to be impacted. So just adding more point to this particular initiative, that government has also mandated that if any incubators are there, and if any Atal incubation center or different government supported incubators are there, so they are eligible for CSR funds. So they can apply for the CSR funds and they can get the approval from the government, and they can receive the corporate CSR funds, and then that funds can be distributed to startup community for the development of this ecosystem. So lots of the organizations are now building up and working up in this particular space. So if you will see, go back to 10-15 years ago, so lots of the industries were not having that kind of verticals, having the specific verticals which is related to foundations. But nowadays, MNCs and even the MSME industries are building up their separate vertical, having the abbreviation of foundations, and they are trying to attract the funds from different sources, and somehow they are trying to contribute for the society, not only in terms of the development of products, but directly services which can solve the problem of the humanity. So definitely it is going to contribute for the social development. That is my point of view. Amit ji has very well defined and well explained all the government initiatives. So I will not go back and again discuss about all the initiatives. But whenever we are designing and we are supporting any government policy, the prime focus is the service to the humanity, whether that particular policy is going to reach out to the root level of the society. So based on that only we are developing all the policies with the governments. Mr. Mahesh has very well defined all the points, whatever be the differences and the changes are happening nowadays post-COVID and COVID during the COVID scenario. So even he will agree for this point that lots of banks, even ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank, and even Yes Bank and other banks are also, they are having this, they have developed this kind of verticals in which they are supporting the startups for this kind of innovations and impact investment kind of things. So that's my point of view, Paresh ji.
Thank you very much. Just one quick query. See, apart from the CSR funds and all, how do large corporates, or impact funds, or students or colleges, how does any particular segment of the economy, segment of the society, work with you? How does one work with you? What can we do so that we can help you or work with you?
So basically, in country, approximately close to 60 AICs, Atal Incubation Centers, are now established, and they are working on various initiatives. So they are able to collaborate with the corporates, they are able to collaborate with the academic partners, they are able to collaborate with the ecosystem partners, government partners.
So how do you collaborate with corporates?
So we are sending proposal to the corporates that we are working in so and so domain. These are our thrust areas. And if you'd like to contribute, if you like to have hand holding with us, or we can go for mutual collaborations for supporting some of the initiatives. So in that way, we are collaborating with the corporates. And even with
right
the
now, what are
government.
the focus areas? Right now, what are the focus areas at your end? Which industry? The OEM industry, automobile.
So basically, all the Atal incubation centers across the country is having different thrust areas. Someone is working on agri-tech, someone is working on EV, someone is working on healthcare. So based on the thrust areas, they can collaborate with the corporates for fulfilling all these objectives.
Okay. Interesting.
And in that way, the jointly the CSR functionalities can be given up to the societies. The services can be contributed for the societal benefit.
Sure, absolutely.
So under so just I would like to add one more point. Under Atal Innovation Mission, Niti Aayog only, there is one separate scheme, that is Atal Tinkering Labs, and thousands of Atal Tinkering Labs have now been established in the schools. And government is promoting this kind of activities to school kids, that how they can develop the social innovation based projects, which can be later on converted into some kind of a startups or some kind of go-to-market strategy, and later on that particular product can come to the society and lots of societal problems can be solved.
No, I absolutely agree, but I have my set of doubts, questions, queries, comments, and a lot of
Right.
them on Tinkering Labs. I think we should, take this offline with Amit Dutta
Right,
and
right,
his background in public policy. We should
right.
probably rack his brains on, what can be done better. Right.
So just
So,
I will add one point to this. So right now there is one PPCR initiative, Pune Platform for COVID Response for Pune. So it's a group of companies. They are working all together day and night, and they are raising so much funds. They are raising so much of the resources for solving all these problems related to COVID related things which is happening in the city. So all these are group of good companies. We are working very closely with industries and agriculture for all related to all this.
perfect. Thank you very much, sir. We move on to Nilotpal ji. Nilotpal ji, welcome once again. We would like to have your angle, understand your angle for the next 3, 4, 5 minutes. Supply chain is one of my favorite, businesses. I understand that, and we have made a lot of money in that. So I'm really keen to understand your angle on how you manage a fund within the supply chain. Your focus area is supply chain, I understand. Nilotpal ji.
No, my focus area is food and agri business and financial inclusion.
Yeah. But your fund, I was saying the fund when it was created, when the first $100 million were raised, it was agribusiness and supply chain within. Right. So please tell us your opinion, Nilotpal ji.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Paresh ji. So, impact investment over the last 15 years has evolved and come a long way. And I'm not just talking about food and agri business, which has been my area of expertise and focus. Even within financial inclusion, healthcare, education, clean energy or energy efficiency, even something like livelihood. All these sectors have evolved quite a bit over these last 15 years. And what has happened in all these sectors is that whenever private sector started looking at investing into these sectors, the lowest hanging fruits were the businesses or the business models which were relatively simple, easy to understand, easy to execute, and which at that point in time at least appeared scalable. Unfortunately, not all of them were successful. Not all sectors have been able to offer the kind of yield some others have managed to. For example, something like microfinance in financial inclusion space is a great example of that. Very simple business model, very fast scalability, limited use of resources, and in terms of impact, it was tremendous. And we have seen the result, but over the last 15 years, it has produced many banks, many small finance banks, and the sector is still growing at 35% year on year. And notwithstanding the impact of COVID on the portfolio quality, I'm sure this country needs that kind of service, especially the financial inclusion and differentiated types of financial inclusion over the next 15 years at least. And as a consequence of that, the kind of the fund flow we have been witnessing in MSME finance, for example, through fintech and other innovations, it is phenomenal. In fact, over the last 3-4 years, fintech has been one of the biggest recipient of private sector investment in India. You talked about innovation. That one single sector has seen lots of innovations also to come in. But not all sectors of impact have shown similar kind of innovation or impact. If you look at food and agribusiness, yes, there has been some innovations, but the initial investment in food and agri business was largely towards businesses which were relatively simple, which were focused largely on the trading, or if you want to look at the entire value chain, though even though I don't subscribe to that view, the businesses like Zomato and maybe something like Big Basket, they are at the fag end of that value chain, but they have also received significant amount of investment. Zomato, of course, doesn't qualify for being an impact investment, but something like Big Basket definitely does, and it has been doing phenomenal job in terms of aggregating the demand as well as the supply for the food and agri related producers. So that segment has also seen innovation and I would say evolved kind of businesses. But the challenge where, especially in the food and agri business sector, has been is the productivity enhancement, the real impact that one sees at the farmer's end. That somehow has not happened as much as one would have desired. I mean, if we look at the kind of crops we produce, I mean, we are either number one or number two in top 5-6 crops that we cultivate. Be it paddy, be it wheat, be it banana. Banana, we are actually by far the biggest producer. But the challenge has been that our productivity in each one of them has been half of the global average, and I'm not talking about the best globally. So half of the global average. So there is a huge potential to enhance the productivity at the farming level itself. Somehow that has been an area which has not seen the kind of innovation, the kind of investment one would have ideally liked to see, except from some of the corporate who have clear interest in those segments. For example, basmati or paddy or maize. So some of these have seen, but crops like banana, mango, cash crops, or for example, for that matter, potato, we have not seen that kind of investment happening from the private sector. And that, I believe, is a challenge for everybody, not just for the entrepreneurs, but also the scientific community, the investors, the businesses, everybody. Talking about the recent trends, I'm sure everybody, Mahesh ji talked about it, the role of technology in the impact sectors. That has increased significantly over the last few years. People are looking at technology as being the main differentiator, and not just the differentiator in terms of having some kind of business advantage or competitive advantage, but also in terms of what would make the business successful in the long run, what would help the business scale up significantly in the next 5 to 7 years. So all these things are happening, and they have added significantly to the growth of the overall sector, and also they have led to the investments into the sector. Now talking about so here I would like to talk about one of the investments that we made recently. So we collaborated with Bombay Stock Exchange, and we have set up this food and agri commodity spot exchange. The company is called BSE Agricultural Markets. So together, BSE is offering the technology platform. The company is stationed at Mumbai within BSE, and we are the knowledge partner or the subject matter expert on the subject. Even though we are also bringing in the money, required capital for the business. But that is one area which I thought has significant potential, not just to create value for itself, but also create significant impact in terms of the target audience that we want to talk about. In India, the agricultural economy is worth $400 billion. And if we look at the pain point of agriculture, the biggest pain point today, and I can say this with all responsibility, is the income or the yield from the farming. That has remained largely stagnant, or it has not kept up with the pace of the rest of the economy. And that might be one of the reasons why part of the farming community feels that they deserve to get more. So what is the solution for that? The solution for that is to link the farmers with the market, help them realize the price in a better way, and that can happen only if we have a platform where if not farmers directly, at least the farmer collectives can come together and they are able to sell their produce in a way which offers them the right kind of price. And that's the whole idea behind having a platform that we have created jointly with BSE. So the platform has just started over a period of time. And just to one more data point which I think is very, very important in the context of this is that out of 30 lakh crore rupee economy, agricultural economy, which is just about the primary produce, which comprises of just the primary produce. If you look at the secondary level trade that happens of agricultural commodities, we are talking about a market which is maybe 75 lakh crore rupees. Out of that, only about 2.5 lakh crore worth of commodities get traded on the electronic exchange, which is very minuscule, which means that farmers farmers or the overall the trading community have not been as efficient as perhaps they could have been. So the idea is that given that we have a huge market potential, market opportunity, we should be in a position to harness that and pass on part of the benefit to the both consumers as well as the farmers. Yeah, so that's it, Paresh ji. I thought I would share some of the ideas of what we are working on, what we have worked on, and going forward, the trends are very, very clear. Technology and innovation are the two key areas which are going to drive the impact sectors, like the way they are doing other sectors. And the business models who are adapting themselves to the changes are the ones who are going to be beneficiaries of this.
Thank you very much, Nilotpal ji. One very interesting thing that you brought for our observation is that the productivity increase at the farmer's end. That there is investment missing here, and yeah, you are right. Coming to think of it, you are absolutely right. And I never, I for one have never, I actually missed out on that point when I was. Whenever I'm looking at impact investment. So yes, that is way big. Congratulations on your partnership with the Bombay Stock Exchange. Wish you all the luck. We will take it offline. We just like we spoke, we'll take our business offline. That brings us to the end of today's seminar. We have time 2-3 minutes, 1 or 2 questions. If anybody has a question, I invite the guests to ask questions to each other, or we can have the audience asking questions. Anyone? Patrick?
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions. One of them was sort of impact investment. Looking at, there was a question about innovation, if that is an impact investment, and I think it is. But I think when you look at innovation, you have a ratio between success and failure, and I think that's fine. So I think it's fine if you have significant impact on your successes, that you also have some failures, and that doesn't make it a bad investment. But I'm not sure how can you sort of manage that. And something a little bit related to that is also in some of the early presentations was talking about governance in some of the evil sectors, like good governance in an evil sector like oil and gas that I work in can be a good thing. But the opposite of that is sort of evil governance in ESG sectors or in green sectors. I think that's at risk with all this money flowing into these new sectors. how do the investors manage that to make sure that there is good governance on these projects as well? So it's kind of two questions, but kind of interlinked. I don't know, to everyone. All the excellent presentations, I should say that as well. Thank you very much, very interesting. So
let me see if I can take a small crack at Patrick's questions. The first question, Patrick, was around innovation and impact, and I also appreciated hearing from Mr. Soundarajan and his views, Professor Soundarajan and his views. You know, I think it always reverts to the basic approach. If I'm an investor who is much more focused on the impact of that investment, then I'm going to be willing to forsake an element of the returns. On the other hand, if I am a hard-nosed VC or private equity fund who is focused primarily on the returns, I may decide that I'm not going to make that investment, even though the innovation looks phenomenal, simply because it doesn't produce the scale, it doesn't have the footprint in 5 years, and simply because I'm not going to be able to exit in the classic sense the way I'd like to. So just a quick thought there. So I think it comes down to the investor's intent, preference, and all the rest of it. So you could have a foundation that gives that money away to that innovation without any expectations other than some impact that is measurable and delivered a few years down the road, versus somebody else who says, listen, I need market rate returns for this, otherwise I'm not going to get involved because it doesn't align with my purpose or my mission or whatever. So that's unfortunately the hard-nosed reality of the market, and there is a market, right? So that's on the second question. I think your question was about, if you just phrase that for me one more time so that I'm sure I understood it properly.
Well, so basically, so focus on the important end. So not about the oil and gas sectors, but like if you're doing a solar panel farm or a wind park or whatever farm, I think there is a risk with all this money that these projects, if there's bad governance, that they don't work as expected. So you make a lot of investment and you think you're going to have a certain impact, but in fact you don't, because the wind farm has been designed incorrectly, so the turbines are not actually generating the energy that was expected. But whoever the contractor is has already run away with his money. So, I mean, that's where sort of the bad governance within the investment can be a risk, right? Both for the impact and for the investment return, I would say for both.
Yeah, I think in that scenario, Patrick, I think, just from a very simplistic standpoint, obviously, if a situation like that were to transpire, then obviously the due diligence that went into that investment was very poorly done to start with. One typically walks in with one's money, understanding the risks by and large, unless there's a force majeure, unless there's a COVID, unless there's a disaster that nobody could have predicted. But by and large, you walk in understanding the parameters, the risk parameters of a sector, of a business, and fundamentally, in order to measure impact, and I'm sure my fellow panelists could add to this, they probably know a lot more than I do, but in terms of measuring impact, one walks in to understand the context that a business is in. Is it to some extent scalable? To some extent, again, depending on your how kind your capital is, how patient your capital is going to be. What's the context that business is in? How scalable is it? What sort of potential does it have? Is there some way to measure that impact? And we talked about impact measurement earlier. So one walks in with certain a priori assumptions, and one develops certain forecasts that are tested, and that are tested for robustness, for risk, and all these things. Now, if the due diligence is not done well, then you will miss some of the basic governance aspects of that business. So if it's a windmill, it's in renewable energy. If it's strong on the E, but it's very poor on the S within the ESG, that could be a huge risk. That could be a huge exposure. If, on the other hand, it's strong on the E and the S, but very weak on the G because the board is poorly constituted, or people aren't treated well, or many other possibilities, then again, the business could fall off the tracks. So one looks at these different aspects from a very thorough and robust due diligence perspective, walking in, understanding that the risks are there, understanding what those risks might be, without being completely blindsided, unless there's a force majeure. So if you're expecting a return of 20% per year and it's 12, that's okay. An investor can stomach that. But if it ends up being 1% or zero because of some major crack in overall governance, then obviously that's a problem. And if the due diligence wasn't done right, then you would miss that. So I think it's really a question of walking in there with your eyes wide open and being ready for the risks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Makes a lot of sense.
Mahesh sir was the right person to answer that question. Not only is he is an impact investment investor and an advisor, he's also an investment. He's also an independent director at Yes Bank. I can tell you from my personal experience, being on the board gives you nightmares about the governance part. So when I was the managing director of a Swiss bank, I was privy to a lot of boards, and I was on a lot of boards. And everything ends. The buck stops there. So whether it's an E or an S or a G or a policy failure or a recruitment failure or a reporting failure, the board had nightmares. So Patrick, your question was terribly right to frame it that way. So even in great companies, within great businesses, non-evil companies that you phrased, the board is always accountable. And in terms of when there is a failure, the board, I'm sure Mahesh sir smiling says it all. So that was a great question, Patrick. Anyone else has a question? We have reached our time limit. We are there for the day. We can extend it by 1 or 2 minutes. Amit, question?
Yeah, so Paresh, thank you. If you don't mind, so Mahesh, my question is to you. In the wake of COVID, obviously, one of the most impacted sectors is obviously the education space, where we are obviously seeing a lot of, new ventures in remote learning and, virtual education. But we all agree that this is largely accessible to a very small percentage of the Indian population, which has access to devices and, internet connections, etc. What can be done, at scale to impact, say education of the most underserved, marginalized sections, like say tribal students in many parts of the country. Of course, you have the Eklavya schools, which are running extremely well, but there is a very, very large cohort in rural areas, etc., who are like really struggling at this time. So, largely in education and livelihoods, the other big area that I'm working on is migrant welfare. And I think we all know that they are the first ones to bear the brunt of a lockdown, and this has been sustained. So any thoughts on, any innovative ideas around, how can we mobilize investments, private capital, to serve these two causes, even if they are not very high return?
Yeah, Amit, I mean, it's a tough nut to crack, right? The last point about migrants, I mean, that's a refugee problem within India. We all talk about international refugees crossing borders, but this is a refugee problem within India. But also, in terms of a quick thought on tech and edu, I think most of the innovation and funding for edu and ed tech for reasons of for reasons of immediate returns, financial capital returns on investment, and so on, have essentially been diverted. Funds have been diverted from fundamental research on what good education is all about, parent-teacher, teacher-student relationships, dynamics. How do you develop an ecosystem for kids that makes sense, etc. All of that, I think, has been forsaken for the sake of taking existing systems and processes, some flawed, some more flawed than others, and automating them, right? So we're now faced with a situation where, yes, we do have more access. Students in remote parts have access, they've got virtual access, they've got online access and all that good stuff. But does it really take care of their education in a holistic sense? I don't think so. So I don't think technology has answered that question. So that now, in terms of how to mobilize capital, it's interesting. I was having a discussion with somebody else on this topic about a month or so, 6 weeks or so ago. One concept that maybe one could devise and mobilize in India is to take, everything is financial at the end of the day, for better or for worse. So you take like schools in like situations, in like demographies, in like living standards, per capita income, and so on, and create portfolios of these schools. It's almost like taking distressed assets and creating a portfolio of distressed assets and finding a market value for that, right? So here, one approach may be to create a portfolio of such educational institutions or schools. It could be by district, it could be by state. I don't know. I don't know what the golden thread would be that would hold them all together for the purposes of a portfolio. But to create a portfolio like that and then to monetize it and then offer it up in a way that distributes any risk that might need to be absorbed on that portfolio across a bunch of, it could be a public-private partnership. It could be something that is leverageable, scalable, that brings people in, and where the returns could be pretty decent. We're not talking about extraordinarily high returns, but where the element of impact is important, the returns can be compromised to a certain extent. But what you're creating is a monetary vehicle, a portfolio of such assets that could be monetized and that could develop some sort of a market value over time. So this is a concept I was discussing with someone. I don't think it's unrealistic. I think it's doable. But of course, we would have to work through the various bureaucracies and all of that at the state level, at the center, at the schools, and so on, and get people to understand the vision and get people to see the value that could be realizable from that. And in an ecosystem sense, there could be many, many benefits to a lot of people in that.
Thank you, Mahesh. Thank you for the response. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. Absolutely superb. Thank you, Mahesh ji. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This was a great session. On behalf of CASI, CSR Diary, all our viewers, my millions of volunteers, thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And all of you, take good care.
Thank you. You too.